The yellow sticky note on Rachel Bennett's bathroom mirror had been there for so long that the edges were starting to curl. In her own messy handwriting, it read, "Take chances." At 28, with a stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter and a string of dating disasters behind her, those two words seemed more like mockery than motivation. Rachel sighed as she applied a thin coat of drugstore mascara, her reflection revealing tired hazel eyes that had seen too many late shifts at the diner. "I can't believe I'm doing this," she muttered, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. Her phone buzzed with a text from Megan, her best friend since college, and the mastermind behind tonight's blind date. "He's perfect for you, I promise." 8 p.m. at Emilio's. "Don't you dare cancel." Rachel's stomach twisted with anxiety. After her disastrous exit from Carson Industries 3 years ago, she'd sworn off anything resembling a risk. Working as an executive assistant to Alexander Carson had been her big break, until it wasn't. The memory still stung, the misunderstanding that led to her abrupt dismissal, the humiliation of cleaning out her desk while security watched, the desperate scramble to find any job that would pay her rent. She'd eventually landed at Rosie's Diner, where the pay was mediocre but the tips were decent. It wasn't the career in business she'd envisioned after earning her degree, but it kept her afloat, barely. And tonight, instead of working a double shift, she was going to meet some mystery man that Megan swore was successful, kind, and definitely not a serial killer. "The bar gets lower every year," Rachel said to her reflection, attempting to smooth a wrinkle from her only nice dress, a navy blue number she'd splurged on 3 years ago for job interviews that never materialized into offers. By 7:45 p.m., Rachel was perched at the bar in Emilio's, an Italian restaurant far fancier than anywhere she'd been in years. The prices on the menu made her wince. She ordered a water, mentally calculating how much she could afford to spend if this date turned out to be a bust and they didn't split the check. At precisely 8:03 p.m., Rachel was checking her phone for the 5th time when a deep voice behind her sent a shiver of recognition down her spine. "Rachel?" She froze, her fingers tightening around her water glass. That voice. It couldn't be. Slowly, she turned on her bar stool. Standing before her was Alexander Carson, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His dark hair was shorter than she remembered, silver streaks at the temples that hadn't been there 3 years ago. But those piercing blue eyes were unmistakable, currently widened in what appeared to be equal shock. "Mr. Carson," she managed, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. His expression shifted from surprise to something unreadable. "I think you can call me Alex, considering the circumstances." Rachel's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Alexander Carson was a 38-year-old billionaire who had inherited Carson Industries from his father and transformed it into one of the most successful tech companies in the country. He was also the last person on Earth she expected, or wanted, to see. "There must be some mistake," Rachel said, already reaching for her purse. "I'm supposed to be meeting someone else." Alex tilted his head slightly. "Let me guess, Megan Williams set you up on a blind date." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. "How did you—" "My cousin Jason is married to her sister," he explained, sliding onto the empty bar stool beside her. "Megan has apparently been trying to set me up with the perfect woman for months. I finally agreed just to get her to stop asking." Rachel felt heat creeping into her cheeks. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this. This is inappropriate." She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her water glass. Alex reached out as if to steady her, but stopped short of touching her arm. "Rachel, wait! Please!" She paused, years of ingrained politeness warring with her instinct to flee. "I didn't know it was you," he said quietly. "But now that you're here, maybe we could at least have dinner. There are some things I'd like to say." "Like what?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "That you're sorry for having me escorted from the building like a criminal, for blacklisting me in the industry, for making it impossible for me to get another corporate job?" His expression darkened. "Is that what you think happened?" The bartender glanced their way, and Rachel lowered her voice. "I know what happened. I was there." Alex ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. "No, you weren't. Not for all of it. And neither was I, as it turns out." He took a deep breath. "Please, just dinner. After that, if you still want to leave and never see me again, I won't stop you." Rachel should have walked out. Every logical part of her brain screamed at her to go, to protect herself from reopening old wounds, but there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability she'd never seen during her year working for him, that made her hesitate. "Fine," she said eventually. "Dinner." But I'm not promising anything else. Relief flooded his features as he gestured to the hostess. Moments later, they were seated at a secluded table in the corner, a basket of warm bread between them and an awkward silence stretching across the white tablecloth. "You look well," Alex said finally, his gaze flickering over her face. Rachel almost laughed. "No, I don't. But thank you for the polite lie." To her surprise, a small smile tugged at his lips. "You always did call me out when I was being disingenuous. It was one of the things I appreciated most about you as my assistant." "And yet it didn't stop you from firing me," she replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Alex's expression grew serious. "That's part of what I wanted to talk to you about. I didn't fire you, Rachel. At least, not personally." She stared at him. "What are you talking about? I was called into HR and told that you had personally requested my immediate termination. I was in Tokyo that week," he said, leaning forward. "Remember? The Nakamura deal." Rachel remembered. She'd spent weeks preparing his presentations for that trip, staying late every night to ensure everything was perfect. "Then who?" "Victor Daniels," Alex said, his jaw tightening. "My former COO, the same man who was later arrested for corporate espionage and embezzlement." The name hit Rachel like a physical blow. Victor had always been coldly professional with her, but she'd caught him watching her with calculating eyes more than once. "Why would he want me gone?" Alex's gaze never left her face. "Because you were getting too close to discovering what he was doing. Those financial discrepancies you flagged the week before you were let go, they were the tip of the iceberg. When I returned from Tokyo and found out you were gone, I was told you'd resigned due to personal reasons." Rachel's mind reeled. For 3 years, she'd carried the weight of that dismissal, believing she'd somehow failed, that she hadn't been good enough. "Why didn't you reach out when you discovered the truth?" Pain flashed across his face. "By the time the dust settled with Victor's arrest and the company restructuring, over a year had passed. I tried to find you, but you'd moved, changed your number. It was like you'd disappeared." "I couldn't afford my apartment anymore," Rachel said quietly. "I moved in with Megan for a while, then found a cheaper place across town." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only when the waiter approached to take their orders. Rachel barely registered what she chose, her mind still processing this revelation that threatened to upend everything she'd believed for years. When they were alone again, Alex reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of hers. "I am sorry, Rachel. Not for firing you, since I didn't, but for not protecting you better, for not seeing what was happening in my own company." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and something long frozen inside Rachel began to thaw, but questions remained, shadowing the moment like storm clouds. "Even if what you're saying is true," she said carefully, "why are you here now? Surely you have better things to do than have dinner with your former assistant." Alex's eyes held hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "Maybe I've spent 3 years wondering what might have been if things had gone differently. Maybe finding you here tonight feels like a second chance I don't deserve, but desperately want." The implications of his words hung in the air between them as the waiter returned with their wine, unaware of the tenuous bridge being built over a chasm of misunderstanding and lost time. The wine was rich and velvety, far better than anything Rachel had tasted in years. She took another small sip, buying time as she processed Alex's words. A second chance. The very idea seemed absurd. Yet here they sat in this upscale restaurant, the past and present colliding in ways she couldn't have imagined hours earlier. "I don't understand," she finally said, setting her glass down carefully. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Alex's fingers drummed lightly against the tablecloth, a nervous gesture she remembered from board meeting preparations. "I'm not suggesting anything specific, I just—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "When I saw you tonight, it felt significant. Like fate, if I believed in such things." Rachel fought the urge to scoff. "Fate has a funny way of favoring billionaires." To her surprise, he laughed, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Fair point. But money doesn't shield you from regret, Rachel, or loneliness. Am I supposed to feel sorry for you?" The question came out before she could stop it, but there was less bite to her words than she'd intended. "No," he answered simply. "Just see me as a person. Not as the man you worked for or the phantom villain who destroyed your career. Just Alex." Their food arrived, momentarily saving Rachel from having to respond. Her salmon was perfectly cooked, but she barely tasted it as she considered his request. Could she separate the man from the misconceptions she'd harbored for years? And even if Victor had been the one to orchestrate her dismissal, Alex was still the head of the company. The buck stopped with him. "Tell me what happened after I left," she said finally, curiosity overcoming her reservations. "With Victor." Alex set down his fork, his expression darkening. "It started with those discrepancies you flagged. Unusual expenses, small transfers to offshore accounts, things that could be explained away individually but formed a pattern when viewed together." Rachel nodded. She'd spent late nights poring over those reports, convinced something wasn't adding up. "I remember thinking it was strange that certain vendors were being paid twice, with the second payment always going to a different account." "Exactly. After you left, those files were buried. By the time I returned from Tokyo, there was no trace of your concerns in the system. It was another 6 months before similar issues surfaced again." Alex's jaw tightened. "By then, Victor had embezzled nearly $7 million and sold proprietary information to our competitors." Rachel's eyes widened. $7 million? How did he think he'd get away with it? He nearly did. If not for Diane in accounting questioning some numbers. Alex trailed off, shaking his head. "The investigation uncovered everything, including emails where Victor ordered HR to terminate you immediately. He claimed I had called from Tokyo, demanding your removal after discovering you'd accessed confidential files. But I had authorization to access those files," Rachel protested. "You gave me clearance yourself for the quarterly reports." "I know," Alex said quietly. "Victor counted on the confusion of the international deal and my absence to act. By the time I found out, the damage was done." Rachel pushed her plate away, her appetite gone. For 3 years she'd carried the weight of perceived failure, believing she'd somehow deserved what happened. The truth was both vindicating and infuriating. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Federal prison, 5-year sentence." Alex's voice was grim, small consolation to those he hurt. Like me, Rachel thought but didn't say. Instead, she asked the question that had been burning inside her since he'd revealed the truth. "Why didn't you try harder to find me afterward? You have resources, investigators. If you really wanted to reach me..." Alex looked away, and for the first time that evening, he seemed genuinely uncomfortable. "I did hire someone about 18 months ago. They found you within a week." Rachel stared at him, speechless. He'd known where she was for over a year and had done nothing. Reading her expression, Alex continued hurriedly, "I drove by the diner once. You were working, laughing with an elderly couple. You looked not happy exactly, but at peace. I convinced myself it would be selfish to disrupt your life, to bring back painful memories for my own peace of mind." "That wasn't your decision to make," Rachel said, an unexpected flare of anger rising in her chest. "So you had information that would have changed everything for me, and you just what? Decided I was better off not knowing?" Alex had the grace to look ashamed. "It sounds terrible when you put it that way." "Because it is terrible," Rachel retorted, pushing her chair back slightly. "Do you have any idea what these years have been like? Working double shifts, counting pennies, giving up on dreams I'd had since college? All because I believed I'd monumentally screwed up my one big opportunity." "Rachel, No," she interrupted, years of suppressed emotions bubbling to the surface. "You don't get to sit there in your $1,000 suit and tell me it was for my own good. That's not how this works." A couple at a nearby table glanced their way, and Rachel forced herself to lower her voice. 3 years, Alex, 3 years of my life spent believing I wasn't good enough." The pain in his eyes was evident, but Rachel couldn't bring herself to care, not yet. Not when the revelation of his deliberate inaction was still so raw. "You're right," he said finally. "I made a choice that wasn't mine to make. I convinced myself it was selfless when it was actually cowardice." His admission surprised her. The Alexander Carson she'd known rarely admitted fault, preferring instead to find solutions and move forward. "Cowardice," she repeated. Alex's gaze met hers unflinchingly. "I was afraid," he confessed, his voice dropping. "Afraid you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me now, like I'd failed you." Which I had. Rachel felt some of her anger deflate, replaced by confusion. "Why would that matter so much to you? I was just an employee." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability she'd never seen during her time at Carson Industries. "You were never just an employee, Rachel. Surely you knew that." The implication hung in the air between them, recontextualizing 100 small memories. The late nights working side by side, the coffee he'd sometimes bring to her desk exactly how she liked it, the way his eyes would linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking. "No," she said slowly, her heart beginning to race. "I didn't know that." Alex ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture again. "It would have been inappropriate to act on it while you worked for me. And then after what happened," he shook his head. The timing was never right. Rachel sat in stunned silence. During her year at Carson Industries, she'd ruthlessly suppressed any attraction she felt toward him, convinced it was one-sided and unprofessional. Now, learning that he'd felt something too created a strange vertigo, as if the past were being rewritten before her eyes. "So what now?" she finally asked, unsure what else to say. "Now," Alex said carefully, "we finish our dinner and I tell you about a position that's open at Carson Industries." Rachel's eyebrows shot up. "You're offering me a job? Tonight?" "Not exactly." He reached for his wine glass, taking a sip before continuing. "After the dust settled with Victor, I created a new department, Corporate Accountability and Ethics. It operates independently, reporting directly to the board rather than to me. They review everything from financial transactions to hiring practices, ensuring nothing like what happened with Victor can ever happen again." "And?" Rachel prompted, not seeing the connection. "And they need a new director, someone with integrity, attention to detail, and first-hand experience with what can go wrong when oversight fails." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "The current director suggested your name before she left for her maternity leave. She remembered your work from when you were there." Rachel's mind reeled. I don't even have the qualifications for something like that." "You have exactly the qualifications," Alex countered. "Your business degree, your institutional knowledge of the company, and most importantly, your moral compass. The board has already approved the selection. The job is yours if you want it." "Just like that?" Rachel couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "After 3 years away? Without an interview, or—" "There would be formalities, of course," Alex interjected. "But yes, essentially just like that." Rachel shook her head in disbelief. "This feels like some strange dream. This morning I was worried about making rent, and now you're offering me a director position at one of the largest companies in the country." "Life changes quickly sometimes," Alex said softly. "I'm living proof of that. One day I was focused solely on growing my father's company, and the next I was watching the FBI arrest my COO and wondering how I could have been so blind." His honesty disarmed her, as did the genuine regret in his eyes. But accepting his offer felt dangerous, not because she doubted her abilities, but because it meant re-entering his orbit, with all the complicated feelings that entailed. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course," he agreed immediately. "Take all the time you need. The position won't be filled until you decide." The waiter appeared, offering dessert menus that Alex politely declined. As he paid the bill, waving away Rachel's attempt to contribute, she found herself studying him with new eyes. He was still the powerful, sometimes intimidating man she remembered, but there were cracks in that facade now, glimpses of a person who had faced his own failures and emerged humbled. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool against Rachel's flushed skin. They stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, the easy conversation of dinner giving way to uncertainty. "Can I call you a car?" Alex offered. Rachel shook her head. "I'm only a few blocks away. I'll walk." He nodded, though concern flickered across his face. "Then, can I walk with you? No pressure about the job, I promise. Just, I'd like a few more minutes of your company." Against her better judgment, Rachel found herself agreeing. As they fell into step together, she wondered if Megan had somehow known what she was doing when she arranged this blind date. Had her friend discovered the truth about Rachel's dismissal, or was this truly the universe's idea of a cosmic joke? Either way, as Alex's hand accidentally brushed against hers in the darkness, sending an unexpected thrill up her arm, Rachel couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this night might hold. The streetlights cast long shadows as Rachel and Alex walked in companionable silence. The awkwardness that had marked the beginning of their evening had faded, replaced by a tentative truce. 3 blocks from the restaurant, they passed a small park where a street musician played a melancholy tune on a saxophone, the notes hanging in the night air like whispered secrets. "I've missed this," Alex said suddenly. Rachel glanced at him. "Missed what? Walking through the city at night? Walking with someone who isn't calculating what they can get from me." His voice was soft, almost lost beneath the music. "Do you know how rare that is in my position? Everyone wants something, a job, an investment, a connection. The higher I've climbed, the more isolated I've become." Rachel hadn't considered that aspect of his life. To her, Alexander Carson had always been the embodiment of power and privilege. The idea that he might be lonely had never crossed her mind. "That sounds difficult," she said, surprising herself with her sincerity. Alex smiled ruefully. "It's a gilded cage of my own making. I'm not asking for sympathy." "Good," Because I'm fresh out, Rachel quipped, then immediately regretted her sharpness. Sorry. Old habits. Don't apologize for honesty. It's refreshing. He paused as they reached a crosswalk. That's one of the things I missed most after you left. Your refusal to sugarcoat things. As they waited for the light to change, Rachel found herself studying his profile. The years had been kind to him, the subtle lines at the corners of his eyes only adding character to his handsome face. She'd spent so long being angry at him, it was disconcerting to feel anything else. Tell me about your life now, he said as they crossed the street, besides the diner. Rachel hesitated, suddenly self-conscious about how little she'd accomplished. There's not much to tell. I work, I pay bills, I try to save a little when I can. What about dreams, goals? Alex pressed gently. The Rachel I knew was always planning her next move. Dreams get expensive, she replied, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. And goals require opportunities. Alex was quiet for a moment. I understand if you don't want to discuss the position I mentioned, but it's not that, Rachel interrupted, stopping to face him. It's just, it feels too convenient, too neat. Life doesn't work that way, Alex. People don't just waltz back into your life after 3 years and hand you everything you thought you'd lost. Is that what you think I'm doing? Trying to ease my conscience? The direct question caught her off guard. Aren't you? Alex's expression turned serious. The job offer is legitimate, Rachel. Yes, I advocated for you, but the board makes the final decision on director-level positions. They reviewed your work history, both at Carson Industries and your previous roles. Your references were impeccable. This isn't charity or guilt. It's recognition of your abilities. Rachel processed this information, unsure whether to believe him. And what about the rest of it? The timing of this blind date seems suspiciously perfect. That was genuinely Megan's doing, Alex said, raising his hands in a gesture of innocence. Though I admit when I heard your name, I agreed immediately. I've been looking for the right moment to approach you for months. Months, Rachel echoed. Alex nodded, his expression earnest. Since the position opened up, I just couldn't find the courage to show up at the diner and disrupt your life. Something about his admission resonated with Rachel. How many times had she driven past the Carson Industries building, tempted to walk in and demand answers, but never finding the nerve? They resumed walking, turning onto Rachel's street, a modest row of apartment buildings that stood in stark contrast to the luxury condos Alex undoubtedly lived in. The silence between them had changed again, charged with unspoken possibilities. This is me, Rachel said, stopping in front of a slightly shabby 5-story building. Number 306. Alex looked up at the building, his expression carefully neutral. Thank you for tonight, for listening at least. Rachel found herself reluctant to end the evening, despite the emotional whirlwind it had been. Would you like to come up for coffee? Just to talk, she added hastily. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by genuine pleasure. I'd like that very much. Inside her tiny apartment, Rachel was suddenly hyper-aware of its shortcomings. The second-hand furniture, the water stain on the ceiling, the general air of making do with less. Alex, however, seemed not to notice as he took a seat at her small kitchen table while she busied herself making coffee. I meant to ask earlier, he said, breaking the slightly awkward silence. How did you end up at Rosie's diner? With your skills, I would have thought that I'd land another corporate job, Rachel finished, setting mugs on the table. I tried, for months, but every application hit a wall of silence. Eventually, I started hearing through former colleagues that I'd been blacklisted, that someone at Carson had flagged me as having been terminated for cause. Alex's face darkened. Victor. It had to be. I know that now, Rachel said, pouring the coffee. But at the time, all I knew was the doors kept closing. Finally, I took the job at Rosie's because the bills don't pay themselves. You should have sued, Alex said, wrapping his hands around the mug. You would have won. Rachel gave a hollow laugh. With what money for a lawyer? Besides, fighting a corporation like Carson Industries would have made me even less employable. Alex winced. You're right. The system protects people like me, not people who've been wronged. He took a sip of coffee. This is good. Don't sound so surprised, Rachel said, but there was no heat in her words. I didn't mean, Alex began, then caught the slight smile on her face. You're teasing me. Maybe a little. Rachel sat across from him, cradling her own mug. It feels strange, doesn't it, sitting here like this after everything? Strange but right, Alex said quietly. his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I've thought about you more than you know, Rachel. Not just about fixing the professional wrong, but—" He trailed off, and Rachel found herself holding her breath. But, instead of answering, Alex reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact sent an electric current through her body, awakening feelings she'd long suppressed. For a moment, they sat frozen in a tableau of possibility, neither willing to break the spell by moving away. Then the shrill ring of Alex's phone shattered the moment. With a muttered apology, he withdrew his hand and checked the screen, his expression shifting to concern. "I need to take this," he said, rising from the table. "It's the Berlin office." Rachel nodded, using his momentary distraction to gather her scattered thoughts. What was happening here? Was she really contemplating a romantic involvement with Alexander Carson, the man she'd blamed for derailing her life for 3 years? From the living room, she could hear snippets of his conversation, something about market fluctuations and emergency protocols. It was a sharp reminder of the world he inhabited, so far removed from her own. When he returned, his expression was apologetic. "I'm sorry, but I need to go. There's a situation that requires immediate attention." "Of course," Rachel said, rising from her chair. "The demands of being a CEO. It's not how I wanted the evening to end," Alex said, his regret seeming genuine. "How did you want it to end?" The question slipped out before Rachel could stop it. Alex took a step toward her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "With clarity," he said softly. "With both of us knowing that this, whatever this is between us, isn't over." Rachel's heart hammered in her chest. "And what exactly is this, Alex?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I'd like to find out if you're willing." Before Rachel could respond, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card. "My personal number," he explained, placing it on the table, "and the details for the position we discussed. Take your time. Think about what you want." What did she want? Rachel wasn't sure anymore. 24 hours ago, the answer would have been simple: financial stability, career advancement, maybe even a little revenge against the company that had wronged her. Now, looking at Alex's earnest expression, everything felt more complicated. "I'll think about it," she promised. Alex nodded, seemingly satisfied. At the door, he paused, turning back to her with an expression of such vulnerability that it caught her off guard. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "meeting you again tonight feels like the universe offering a second chance. I hope you'll consider taking it, professionally and perhaps personally as well." With that, he was gone, leaving Rachel standing in her doorway, the business card clutched in her hand, and her mind swirling with possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine since the day she'd walked out of Carson Industries for the last time. The next morning, Rachel woke to her phone buzzing insistently. Megan's name flashed on the screen and Rachel groaned, knowing her friend would demand every detail of the blind date. "You've got a lot of explaining to do," Rachel said by way of greeting. Megan's laughter bubbled through the phone. "Good morning to you too, sunshine. So, how was it? Did you hit it off with Alex?" "You knew," Rachel accused, sitting up in bed. "You knew exactly who you were setting me up with." "Guilty as charged," Megan admitted, not sounding remotely sorry. "But before you get mad, you should know it was his idea to approach it as a blind date. He thought you might refuse to see him otherwise." Rachel's irritation faltered. "Wait, he contacted you? When?" "About a month ago. He called out of the blue, said he'd been trying to find a way to reconnect with you. He seemed genuinely remorseful, Rach." Megan paused. "I wouldn't have gone along with it if I thought he had bad intentions." "So you decided to ambush me instead?" Rachel couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "I prefer to think of it as orchestrating a long overdue reunion," Megan replied cheerfully. "So? Are you going to tell me what happened, or do I need to come over with emergency donuts to extract the information?" Rachel sighed, knowing resistance was futile. "It was complicated. He offered me a job." "A job?" Megan sounded disappointed. "That's it? Because the way he talked about you, I was expecting at least a marriage proposal by dessert." "Megan!" Rachel protested, heat rising to her cheeks. "What? The man is clearly besotted with you. Has been for years, apparently." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "He told you that?" "Not in so many words," Megan admitted. "But it was obvious from how he talked about you, like you were the one who got away." The description sent an unexpected thrill through Rachel. Could it be true? Had Alexander Carson, billionaire CEO, most eligible bachelor on the East Coast, been pining for his former assistant all this time? As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a text notification. "Unknown number. But the message left no doubt as to the sender. I haven't stopped thinking about last night. Dinner again tonight? Your choice of restaurant this time. Rachel stared at the message, a smile slowly spreading across her face as a plan began to form in her mind. Megan, she said into the phone, I need to go shopping. Something tells me I'm going to need a new outfit for my job interview. Now we're talking, Megan exclaimed. I'll pick you up in an hour, and Rachel, I want all the details. As Rachel hung up, she glanced at the business card Alex had left, running her fingers over the embossed lettering of Carson Industries. After 3 years of setbacks and struggle, everything was suddenly changing. The question was, did she have the courage to change with it? The Carson Industries headquarters loomed above Rachel, its gleaming glass exterior reflecting the morning sunlight. At 40 stories tall, it dominated the city skyline, a monument to success and innovation. 3 years ago, she'd walked out of this building in tears, her career in shambles. Today, she was walking in with her head held high, wearing a charcoal grey suit that had cost more than she wanted to admit, even to herself. You've got this, she whispered, clutching the leather portfolio Megan had insisted she buy. It's just a building. But it wasn't just a building, and they both knew it. It was a symbol of everything she'd lost, and potentially everything she might regain. The past week had been a whirlwind. After their dinner reunion, Alex had been true to his word about the job offer. The board interview had been scheduled promptly, and Rachel had spent days preparing, reviewing Carson Industries' current projects and financials, familiarizing herself with the new ethics department's structure and mission. Through it all, Alex had maintained a respectful distance professionally, making it clear that her candidacy would be evaluated on merit alone. But outside of office hours, things had been different. They'd had dinner 3 more times, each encounter peeling away layers of misunderstanding and resentment, revealing a connection that felt both new and familiar. Last night, he'd kissed her for the first time, standing outside her apartment door. It had been gentle, almost hesitant at first, but when she'd responded, pulling him closer, the kiss had deepened into something that left them both breathless. This complicates things, she'd murmured against his lips. Only if we let it, he'd replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Whatever happens with the job, Rachel, I want you to know that what's happening between us is separate. Real. She'd believed him, mostly. But standing now at the entrance to Carson Industries, doubt crept in. What if the board saw her relationship with Alex as a conflict of interest? What if they thought she'd leveraged personal connection for professional gain? Taking a deep breath, Rachel pushed through the revolving doors into the lobby. The security guard, not the same one who'd escorted her out years ago, thankfully, checked her visitor badge and directed her to the executive elevator. The boardroom was exactly as she remembered it. Imposing mahogany table surrounded by 12 high-backed leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. 9 board members were already seated when she entered. Alex sat at the far end, his expression carefully neutral as he nodded a greeting. Ms. Bennett, called Sandra Willis, the board chairwoman, a formidable woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair and piercing eyes. Please, have a seat. Rachel took the empty chair at the opposite end of the table from Alex, setting her portfolio down with hands that she willed not to tremble. Let's begin, Sandra said, glancing around the table. We've all reviewed your resume and the proposal you submitted for the ethics department's next phase. Most impressive. Thank you, Rachel replied, her voice steadier than she felt. However, Sandra continued, her gaze sharpening, there are concerns about your relationship with our CEO. And there it was, the very issue Rachel had been dreading. She resisted the urge to look at Alex, keeping her focus on Sandra instead. I understand those concerns, Rachel said carefully, but I'd like to point out that the ethics department reports directly to the board, not to the CEO. Any personal relationship would have no bearing on my professional responsibilities or reporting structure. Sandra's lips twitched in what might have been approval. Well put. Still, perception matters in a publicly traded company. How would you address potential accusations of favoritism? Rachel had anticipated this question. Transparency and recusal, she answered promptly. Any decisions involving areas where there might be a perceived conflict would be documented, and if necessary, I would recuse myself in favor of my deputy director. Additionally, I would welcome heightened scrutiny of my department's work and decisions as a safeguard against any appearance of impropriety. A murmur of discussion rippled through the board members. Rachel caught a glimpse of Alex, whose face remained impassive but whose eyes conveyed pride. The questioning continued for nearly an hour, covering everything from her technical knowledge to her management philosophy. Rachel answered each query with confidence, drawing on both her education and her hard-won experience at Rosie's Diner, where managing difficult customers and tight budgets had taught her more about human nature and resource allocation than any business class. Finally, Sandra leaned back in her chair. "One last question, Miss Bennett. Given your history with this company, the circumstances of your departure and the subsequent hardships you faced, why would you want to return?" It was the question Rachel had been asking herself ever since Alex had made the offer. Her answer would determine not just whether she got the job, but whether she could truly move forward. "Because I believe in second chances," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "For myself, for Carson Industries, and for the relationship between companies and their employees. What happened to me was wrong, but it also revealed systemic weaknesses that, if addressed properly, could prevent similar injustices in the future." She paused, meeting Sandra's gaze directly. "I don't want to return to rewrite the past. I want to help shape a better future." The sincerity in her words seemed to resonate around the table. After a moment of silence, Sandra nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Bennett. If you wouldn't mind waiting outside, we'll take a few minutes to confer." In the hallway, Rachel paced, replaying her answers in her mind and wondering if she'd said enough, or too much. When the door opened 10 minutes later, it was Alex who emerged, his expression unreadable. "Well?" she asked, her heart hammering. His serious face broke into a smile. "Congratulations, Director Bennett. You start Monday." Relief and joy flooded through her. "They approved it. Even with, Alex confirmed, his voice low. "They were impressed by your honesty about our relationship and your plans for addressing any conflicts. Sandra specifically mentioned your integrity." Rachel felt tears pricking at her eyes. After 3 years of struggle and self-doubt, this validation meant more than Alex could possibly know. "There's something else," he said, pulling a folder from under his arm. "The board insisted on one condition." Rachel's stomach dropped. "What condition?" "Given the personal nature of our relationship, they want you to sign a modified ethics agreement." He handed her the folder, a strange gleam in his eye that she couldn't quite interpret. Rachel opened it, steeling herself for restrictive clauses or punitive oversight. Instead, she found a single page with just a few lines of text. "In recognition of the potential conflicts arising from a personal relationship with the CEO, the Director of Ethics agrees to maintain absolute professional boundaries during working hours and to disclose any changes in said personal relationship status to the Board of Directors within a reasonable time frame." Rachel frowned, reading further, until she reached the final clause. "Including but not limited to engagement or marriage." She looked up sharply to find Alex watching her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Did you know about this?" she asked, gesturing to the document. "I may have mentioned to Sandra that our relationship was serious," he admitted. "I didn't expect her to be quite so forward-thinking in the paperwork." Rachel's mind raced. "We've only reconnected for a week, Alex. Isn't this premature?" He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Probably. But I've spent 3 years regretting losing you once. I'm not interested in wasting more time." "This is crazy," Rachel said, but she couldn't stop the smile spreading across her face. "Completely," Alex agreed, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "But sometimes crazy works. We don't have to decide anything now. I just want you to know that for me, this isn't casual." Before Rachel could respond, the boardroom door opened again and Sandra emerged, eyebrows rising at the sight of them holding hands. "I see you've reviewed the special clause," she remarked dryly. "Just remember, Director Bennett, full disclosure is the cornerstone of ethical governance." Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks, but met the older woman's gaze steadily. "Understood, Chairwoman Willis." Sandra nodded, a hint of approval in her expression. "Welcome back to Carson Industries. I expect great things from you." With that, she strode off down the hallway, leaving Rachel and Alex alone again. "She likes you," Alex said, sounding somewhat surprised. "She's reserving judgment," Rachel corrected. "As she should." Alex laughed, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. "Always keeping me honest. It's one of the many, many things I've missed about you." His words warmed something inside her, a place that had been cold for too long. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "I need to give notice at Rosie's, start preparing for Monday. Let me take you to lunch first." Alex suggested, his eyes hopeful. To celebrate properly. As a couple, not as CEO and Director of Ethics. The word couple sent a thrill through Rachel. A week ago, she'd been a struggling waitress with a grudge against corporate America, specifically against the man standing before her. Now, everything had changed, her career, her prospects, her heart. "I'd like that," she said softly. As they walked toward the elevator, Alex's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. The contact was simple but profound, a bridge between their past and whatever future they might build together. 6 months later, Rachel stood in the ethics department's newly renovated offices, surveying her team with pride. In half a year, they'd established new oversight protocols, revised the whistleblower protection policy, and created a peer review system that was being hailed as an industry model. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying, allowing Rachel to use her talents while making a genuine difference in how the company operated. Her personal life had undergone equally dramatic changes. 3 months after starting at Carson Industries, she'd moved out of her cramped apartment into a spacious loft downtown, alone. Despite Alex's not-so-subtle hints about cohabitation, she needed to establish her professional reputation first, to prove to herself and others that she'd earned her position through merit, not romance. Alex had understood, though his patience was clearly being tested. Their relationship had deepened despite the professional boundaries they maintained at work, where they were models of propriety. After hours was another story entirely. "Director Bennett?" Her assistant's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Your 5 o'clock is here." Rachel glanced at the clock, surprised. She'd lost track of time reviewing the quarterly ethics compliance reports. "Send them in, please." The door opened and Alex entered, looking every bit the powerful CEO in his tailored suit. But his eyes, when they met hers, held the warmth reserved only for her. "Mr. Carson," she greeted him formally, aware of her assistant's curious gaze. "What can I do for you?" "I need your sign-off on the new International Vendor Ethics Agreement," he replied, equally professional as he placed a folder on her desk. "And I was hoping you might be available for dinner this evening. There's something important I'd like to discuss." The formality in his tone sent a flutter of anticipation through her. "I believe I can fit you into my schedule," she said, fighting a smile. Hours later, seated in a private dining room at the restaurant where they'd reconnected on that fateful blind date, Rachel watched Alex with growing suspicion. He'd been uncharacteristically nervous all evening, checking his pocket repeatedly and stumbling over conversations they normally navigated with ease. "All right," she said finally, setting down her dessert fork. "What's going on? You've been acting strange all night." Alex took a deep breath, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I had this whole speech planned, about second chances and fate, and how meeting you changed everything for me, twice." He smiled ruefully. "But now that the moment's here, I find I just want to ask you one simple question." Rachel's heart began to race as he stood, moving to kneel beside her chair. From his pocket he withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a stunning diamond ring. "Rachel Bennett," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes, "will you marry me?" Time seemed to suspend as Rachel looked from the ring to the man holding it, the man who had once been her boss, then her perceived enemy, and now the love of her life. Their journey had been anything but conventional, filled with misunderstandings and missed opportunities, but also with growth, forgiveness, and the kind of deep connection that comes from seeing someone at their worst and their best. "Yes," she said simply, tears of joy filling her eyes. "Yes, I will." As Alex slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of happiness, Rachel thought about the yellow, sticky note that had once adorned her bathroom mirror. "Take chances," it had said. She'd finally taken the biggest chance of all, opening her heart to love and possibility after years of guarding it carefully. And as Alex held her close, whispering plans for their future together, Rachel knew with absolute certainty that some chances were always worth taking.